As COVID-19 continues to spread around the world, we've seen a significant impact on the world's economies. In the early phases of the crisis, there was a supply shock as parts from China ran out with factories shut. We saw this specifically in the Korean automobile industry, for example. But now that China is working to bring its economy back online, the spread of the virus has resulted in a decreased demand in other countries such as Europe and the United States, which is now affecting South Korean exports. To discuss these challenges that the South Korean economy faces as it navigates this economic crisis, we're pleased to have with us today Mr. Jong Young-jin and Tammy Overby. You should have received their bios in your confirmation email, but Mr. Jong is the Minister for Economic Affairs at the Embassy of the Republic of Korea. He served extensively in the Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy, as well as the Ministry of Knowledge Economy and the Ministry of Commerce, Industry and Energy. Tammy is a senior advisor at the McClarty Associates. She has 3 decades of experience working on Asia, including 21 years living and working in Seoul. Her most recent experience entailed 8 years leading the U.S. Chamber of Commerce's Asia team. Before we begin, I have one brief administrative note. If you have a question for either Mr. Jong or Tammy, if you could please use the Q&A function, which is located at the bottom of your screen in Zoom. We'll be looking for the questions there. With that, I'd like to turn to our guests and begin our conversation. Tammy, I'd like to start off with you. Can you start off by giving us your take on sort of the big picture of the economic fallout from COVID-19 on the global economy and specifically for companies? What has been the significance so far and the challenges that companies face that we should all be aware of?
Thanks, Troy. I also want to start by thanking you and the Korea Economic Institute for all of your strong programming during these challenging times. I appreciate you guys giving me some interesting content to watch. Also, Minister Jong, I want to thank you for your government sort of being the beacon of hope for the rest of the world on how we can successfully overcome this. And since I am currently in the state of Maryland, I want to thank you for the 500,000 COVID testing kits that Maryland just received. So kamsahamnida. Troy, to your question, there has been significant economic contractions this year. The IMF came out with a warning about the economic toll that the world faces. This is going to be comparable to the Great Depression of the 20s. The global economy was supposed to grow 3.3% this year, but we have the IMF projecting now that it's likely going to contract by 3% in 2020. And this decline in output is going to be worse than the recent economic recession we had in 2008. And since South Korea is an export-driven economy, this is really going to be felt there. The U.S. economy is projected to decline by 6% this year. So we're feeling it with record numbers of unemployment. China has already contracted 6.8% in the first quarter of this year, and that's the first time since 1992 when first official quarterly GDP records started being kept. Again, we're seeing significant increases around the world on unemployment, which is going to frankly make the crisis prolong it and make it even worse. The International Labor Organization predicts an additional 25 million jobs are going to be lost this year. Just to put that in context, during the financial recession of 2008, unemployment increased by 22 million. So it's going to be worse than what we went through recently. The U.S. unemployment has already reached 22 million jobs. South Korea has lost 195,000 jobs last month, which marked their sharpest decline since May 2009. And I would note that in Korea, those unemployment numbers don't include temporary employees or temporarily unemployment, people who've been furloughed. Unemployment rate for irregular workers is also expected to exponentially increase, despite the Korean government's good efforts to try to improve job security. And so, of course, with this continued unemployment, you've got a decrease in consumption. And we've seen that across the board in all service industries, hotels, tourism, entertainment, transportation. So unemployment is going to be a big issue. And the trade is also expected to decrease anywhere from 13 to 32%, according to the WTO. And it's going to look as grim as it did back in 2008. It looks like the manufacturing and service sectors are going to be the ones hit the hardest. And this is on top of an environment where trade was already slowing down thanks to the trade war that we had between the United States and China, which frankly was affecting everyone. Yesterday, Korea's April 1st through April 20th export numbers came out, and they reflected a 27% drop year on year. And Korean exports to the U.S. Sank 17.5%. So I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but it's a tough situation right now.
So thank you, Tammy. I mean, grim, I think, might be the word we could use. Mr. Jong, Tammy has really sort of laid out a lot of the details we've heard. I mean, things, like the hotel industry, I've seen things suggesting like 5% occupancy rates. So really, truly, unseen numbers in normal times.
Mm-hmm.
She mentioned the export figures for Korea, but how has the Korean economy been impacted by this crisis?
Thank you, thanks, Troy, for your great introductions. And thank you, Tammy. So you are very good at in number and figures in Korea than me. So, and as Tammy mentioned, so like other countries, Korea has faced the enormous economic impact caused by COVID-19, as well as aviation and tourism. Key industries such as automobiles and semiconductors, energy have been negatively affected. Yeah, I was really surprised yesterday. So the WTI, the future price dropped negative. So it also give a huge negative impact to Korea as well. Korean government has responded to COVID-19 without lockdown or comprehensive entry ban based on the principle of the openness, transparency, and democracy. Korea has taken preemptive and transparent quarantine measures, and we have been quite successful in controlling the COVID-19. We have also been implementing $16 billion of the economic stimulus package and cutting interest rate from 1.25% to 0.75%. As the ruling party gained huge victory in congressional election last week, response to COVID-19, such as the additional stimulus package, is expected to be further strengthened. Thank you.
So, Minister Jong, you do think that there will be a positive impact, I guess, then from the National Assembly election results in terms of managing the crisis?
Yeah.
Thank you. So, Tammy, I want to turn back to you. I mentioned in the opening that you've spent 21 years in South Korea. How does this current pandemic compare to your experience of other times where there's been pandemics or economic crises in South Korea? I mean, really, are those comparable, or are we at a different time?
We're in a different time, Troy. Last year I learned the phrase black swan event. And I believe this is the first black swan event I've truly witnessed. But back in 2015, we saw Korea deal with another pandemic with MERS, the Middle East respiratory syndrome, but nothing like this. We've seen SARS. SARS, I think we saw a 0.25% income decline in GDP, and in 2003, and MERS, a 2% decline in GDP in 2015. So I've never seen anything like this. And the scope and the breadth of it, and again, it's global. Every company that I talk to, regardless of their location, is dealing with, they're either in the middle of it or hopefully coming on the beginning, as many of my friends are in Korea, beginning to come out of it. But the devastation, we haven't, I think we haven't begun to see where it's going to end.
And I mean, I had looked previously at some numbers on this, just comparing MERS, SARS, and others, just looking at the aviation travel industry. And, we're talking about now Korean Air and Asiana, only I think about 10% of their international routes are still operational. It's really impacted significantly beyond what would happen in the past. I think even when I looked at the H1N1 figures when during that one, there were no travel bans or anything of that nature. So, it's a much more significant consequence, I think, this time.
And to have President Trump this morning basically ban immigration into the United States, I mean, these are unprecedented times.
No, yeah. And I mean, this is the question, is interconnected as our economies are, as interconnected as the world is, we need a platform for getting things started back up, a way that we can all know it's safe to travel on airlines and everything again. And I think, it's important for South Korea, but it's important for the U.S. airline industry and others. But so, Minister Jong, keeping maybe with that theme of international cooperation, South Korea has now come out, or at least coming out of, this crisis, having, done a really great job in containing COVID-19. What, given South Korea's own international connections, has South Korea done really on the multilateral level to try and help other countries deal with this crisis?
Yes, so as you know, the COVID-19 has spread it to most countries in the world, and the most economies are connected in supply chains and financial networks. That's why President Moon has led international cooperation effort by proposing the G20 emergency summits and Asian +3 summits. He also made numerous phone calls with his counterpart, including President Trump. Korean government has provided medical supplies, including test kits, to needed countries. We are also sharing our experience with other countries and international organizations.
Thank you.
Troy, if I could mention, some economists and folks are beginning to talk about reshoring, the need to become self-sufficient, or what our North Korean friends might call juche, where we do everything ourselves. But my perspective is that actually I think this calls for even more globalization. Yes, we need more diversification. When we discover that perhaps all of the critical components for certain medical devices are made in a single country, that's a problem. But for me, what I'm beginning to feel about the impact of this is that it doesn't mean that we should bring everything home. It means that we need to cooperate more. And again, diversification is very important, but also, Troy, I think you were beginning to mention, we need better international cooperation mechanisms, and frankly, we need better global leadership. And Minister Jong, please allow me to thank you again for Moon Jae-in exhibiting the kind of leadership that we need. He's willing to share his knowledge, his experience, and he's willing to share his valuable testing products, medical supplies. So Korea is a very good positive example on a global stage right now.
So thank you for your comment. I will report to your comment to Seoul.
So Tammy, maybe just sort of drill down a little bit more on this whole reshoring issue, for a moment. We've seen the case that, Japan, as part of their stimulus bill, I believe has had $200 billion to encourage companies to come back to Japan. While we haven't had anything quite that direct in the United States, I've seen commentary that Peter Navarro and perhaps others want the pharmaceutical industry to move a lot of their production back to the United States, though if not that, maybe Mexico or Canada. How I agree. I think you want diversification because the challenge becomes anytime production is largely in one spot, if there's a crisis in that spot, be it man-made, be it from natural events, then you have impacts all the way down the supply chains and everything. So how would you propose that we really balance this desire for have things maybe more secure, maybe outside of, because there's been a lot of concerns about how well China's simply done reporting what was happening outside of China, with the need to understand that you do need, as you said, diversification, but that also there are benefits to having supply chains that do go through other countries in terms of helping to maintain the economic vitality of other countries and the economic efficiency that comes with that.
Yeah, that you raise several valid, very interesting points in there. Regarding the Japanese effort, I also think there's been further discussion about providing financial incentive for Japanese companies to move out of China, not necessarily back to Japan, but just to diversify out of China. In fact, we are consulting with a client on looking opportunities in India, or frankly, I would suggest South Korea presents some great opportunities. But the other point that you made that really struck me is that it's important, if we're all going to keep growing, we all need to be able to sell. For example, for the United States, American companies learned in the mid 80s and onward that if they wanted to grow, they had to export. So, something like 95% of the world lives outside the borders of the United States. So if we're going to grow and sell products, we've got to be able to sell abroad. And to do that, one needs a healthy global economy. This whole inward looking, as Peter Navarro loves to do, the navel gazing, for me, is never going to help us all continue to grow and to lift millions and millions of people out of poverty. In order to do that, we have to work together. We need to have a global system that works. And frankly, we need global leadership. And unfortunately, there's a very large global leader that is absent from the world right now.
So, Minister Zhang, part of this also, I think, raises the question of really new opportunities. One of the things that I saw recently that caught my attention, being a sports fan, and I think, a lot of us who are at home now being somewhat, starved for entertainment and content, was that, with, the NBA season having been canceled here in the United States, well, postponed, not canceled, excuse me, I should clarify that. MLB having been postponed. I saw recently that ESPN is considering purchasing the rights to KBO games to broadcast in the United States. It hasn't gotten that far, but I understand, because with the KBO looking to start back up, there's a desire to maybe have that type of content to show. Well, we focus now on the needs to deal with the health crisis, but to look a little further down the road, are there any economic opportunities you see in the U.S. Korea economic relationship sort of after this crisis that we should maybe focus on as well?
Sure. So the Korea and United States have been working together to respond to the COVID-19. As you know, two countries have closely cooperated in Global Health Security Agenda, GHSA, and the Global Alliance for the Vaccines and Immunizations, GAVI. And the signing of the currency swap agreement between the two countries is a great example of the cooperation in financial sectors. And as Tammy mentioned, so yesterday Governor Larry Hogan had a ceremony accepting the Korean test kit. And like this, cooperation with the state and local government in the United States has also been very successful. And the global cooperation should be, that's why global cooperation should be strengthened to be prepared for the similar crisis in the future. I think in the unprecedented COVID-19 era, change of the economic behaviors such as the increase of the contactless transactions are expected. Also, the importance of the digital infrastructure for telework, telemedicine, online learning was reinforced. That's why cooperation in digital economy utilizing digital tech and AI can be considered promising. International regime for the core personnel's free movement of market for trade, especially for the healthcare product, also should be established. Thank you.
Thank you. That sounds like a really great list. And I think, even looking at the idea of telemedicine, it seems like it's something that could help right now with COVID-19 to sort of do pre-diagnosis of people to figure out where we need to get the tests to.
Yeah,
so I think
that is very popular in Korea right now.
It makes sense. I mean, like I said, it's an easy way. Have the doctor go through, talk to you, find out maybe what your symptoms are, and then say, well, you know what, that actually is maybe something else, or no, you need to go and get the test. So I think that's a really great area to focus on. Tammy, I'd like to ask you, when we really look at this crisis, we're often focused right now at what's going on, but maybe in the slightly shorter term, but more the medium term, what do you see as the possible impact of the COVID-19 crisis on the U.S. Korea bilateral economic relationship?
Well, the U.S. Korea bilateral relationship, frankly, is under some tension, and we have 28,500 American troops stationed on the peninsula, and we're in the middle of some very difficult discussions on a special measures agreement, a burden sharing agreement. And I was particularly struck that literally on the day that it was reported that President Trump and President Moon had a phone call where President Trump was asking President Moon for his kind help and for advice and help in securing some testing equipment and medical equipment, that the press also reported that President Trump had vetoed a deal that our two negotiating sides had apparently agreed on that would reflect a 13% increase in what the Republic of Korea was paying for U.S. troops to be stationed there. So that's a little discouraging to me, because this is a time when we really need to be working together and understanding why it just doesn't seem to me to be the right time to be pushing the South Korean people to spend a lot more money when, again, the financial impacts of this virus are going to be dramatic. In the early days of this crisis, South Korea was getting a lot of ink, a lot of press, but it was because they had the second largest outbreak outside of China. So the impacts on South Korea now, of course, we're celebrating South Korea has flattened the curve, and that's wonderful. But I don't want to minimize the damage that I believe is being done to the South Korean economy. Also, before the COVID outbreak, the South Korean economy was already contracting. There were some economic challenges that the country was facing. So I think the South Korean economy, like the global economy, is going to struggle. But I do think there's some great opportunities for our countries to reinforce our positive relationship and continue to work together. Whether it's strong economic relations under the Chorus Free Trade Agreement. It was just reported from USTR that they had a very positive joint committee meeting this year. And talking to American clients in Seoul, I hear that Chorus continues to provide benefits for our companies. But also on the security side, I think we have to remember that Northeast Asia can be a scary place, and there is no better partner for America than the Republic of Korea. So to me, those are two areas, security and the economy, where we should double down to continue to work together.
Oh, yeah, I agree. I think, we're talking about the economic issues today, but clearly the security issues, filter into this. And, you're right to sort of underline and underscore the real economic challenges that we're all facing right now, because, my colleague Kyle Ferrier and I, when this was all really kind of, not to say that things aren't bad now, but really kind of starting to take steam, we would just be going back and forth, sharing the numbers. Just, these are the kinds of things you never thought you'd really see in your lifetime in the absence of, like World War or something. And so these are truly difficult economic times. So, Mr. Jong, sort of looking at the recovery phase of this right now, especially from the South Korean perspective, the most immediate question is, how and when do we return to normal social and economic activity at home? South Korea is further along this curve than, the United States and some other countries. Can you talk about what factors the Korean government is considering in making its decisions in ending social distancing measures?
Yeah, sure. I think the data is the most important things to turn to the normal situations. Currently, COVID-19 outbreak in Korea has been stabilizing, as you mentioned. Now, our new confirmed cases per day has declined to less than 20, actually less than 10, since hitting the peak at the 909 people on February 29th. Korea agrees to the gradual approach shown in the U.S. government guideline for opening up the country. Recently, Korean government decided to extend social distancing policy for 2 weeks, 2 weeks more until May 5th. But we also decided to lift the ban on some businesses, including indoor sports, private education facilities, and religious facilities. So from this week, so we can go church for worships. But the Korean government will evaluate the necessity of extending the social distancing policy regularly, and the determination should be mainly based on the medical data, including daily new cases and rate of symptomatic infections. Yeah.
Thank you. I think, that seems like a very logical and data-driven way to go, and it's hopefully going to be one that proves to be the right path forward. Tammy, as we look a little further down the line, there's been a lot of talk about how COVID-19 will impact the global trading system once we all start to recover from the virus. What do you see as the most likely impact on globalization, and what might this mean for the United States and South Korea?
Well, I think before COVID-19, we had polarization. We had it in our country growing. We also saw it across Europe. And I'm afraid that this crisis may give strength to those voices. However, as I stated earlier, I believe that the real solution isn't to become more polarized, but it's actually to increase cooperation. And again, whether it's, a company, a great American company like 3M, that's making medical supplies in the United States, but also has overseas locations, and being able to bring some of those resources home, but still being able to serve the markets where the products are made. I think we're all going to need more of that. But I'm mostly concerned with the global institutions. We need global leadership at a place like the World Trade Organization more now than ever. So it seems to me to be a terrible time for the United States to threaten to defund the World Health Organization when we're in the middle of the worst global pandemic of our lifetimes. So again, I just think we need leadership and that's missing right now.
So before I turn to questions from the audience, I have one last question that I'd like to get both of your thoughts on. Do you see any potential avenues for the U.S. and South Korea to advance cooperation, both in tackling the virus and in the post-COVID-19 world? Maybe we'll start with you, Minister Jung.
Yeah. So, yes. So, yeah. My observation is that, considering huge setback of the global economy and the industry, largely due to the strong quarantine measures, it is hard to predict the path and the speed of the global economy's recovery after COVID-19. But I mentioned earlier that the most important thing is the building health infrastructures and establishing institutional foundation to maintain free flow of goods, services, and investment, and strengthening financial cooperations would be required. And I think most important thing is we have to prepare to not repeat the unprepared the export measures on the healthcare products. So it is not helpful to the world. So we have to make some rules in the global sense, I think. Thank you.
Minister Jung, to build on that, your reference to export restrictions on medical equipment, that would be a wonderful place to start. Troy, you asked just an excellent question. U.S. technology companies, I think, are showing that there's great opportunities for collaboration, whether it's Google and Apple, and then marry that together with Korea experience on contact tracing and on ensuring that quarantines are kept, and then sort of mix all that up with AI and big data. I think there's incredible opportunities for our two countries, the business communities, to work together.
Oh yeah, I hadn't thought about it that way, but I think that might make a lot of sense. So I'm going to turn to the questions that I have here in the queue now from those listening in. And there's one from Bill Brown, who up until recently was an resident fellow at KI that I'm somewhat intrigued by. And Mr. Jung, maybe this is a question best for you, but Bill asks, has Korea done any testing to see what percentage of the population overall has been infected by COVID-19?
Yes. So as you know, the total population of the Korea is about 50 millions. But out of that population, we tested about 570,000 people. And as of yesterday, we have 10,683 confirmed cases, and the 237 people passed away. So, but we are controlled the diseases. So, as of yesterday, we found only 9 confirmed cases, and we found that the confirmed cases less than 10 in I think 3 days in a row.
Thank you. So I have a question from Jonathan Lim. We talked earlier briefly about the National Assembly election, but an additional question that Jonathan asked about the election is, has it served as an affirmation of President Moon's response to COVID-19?
Yeah, I think so. So the support rate for the President Moon recently goes up to 57% something in my memory. So that figure is much higher than the support rate for the ruling parties. So, and most Korean people, think our government did a good job in treating the COVID-19. So yeah, the big victory in the congressional election last week it will be very helpful for Korean government to tackle the COVID-19. So yeah.
So as a specific question that I have on this, maybe for you, Tammy, just to touch on the election for a second. What do you think the results mean for President Moon's economic policy more broadly going forward?
Well, I think it definitely means he's got the mandate. He owns whatever happens now. The ruling party got an unprecedented majority. First of all, there's really significantly high voter turnout. We haven't seen that kind of voter turnout since Korea became a democracy in 1987. And they have, the 2/3 majority. The ruling party now, they own whatever happens. So I'm hopeful that they will have some really creative ideas for the economy. Because as I mentioned earlier, Korea had significant economic headwinds before the crisis. You overlay what's happened the last 2.5 months, and the devastation is going to be significant. So, but the ruling party has the power to pass their legislation through the National Assembly. They can virtually do anything short of changing the Constitution. But other than that, they own it. So I hope that means that they've got a good, solid economic plan. If they're looking for an idea, this would be a great time for labor reform, to really make Korea an economy that works for everyone.
So, Mr. Jong, I have a question for you from David Delgado. He asks, what lessons can the United States learn from South Korea in terms of how to slow and stop the growth of the spread of the coronavirus in the United States?
So yeah, I'm not sure that I'm in the position that give you a comment on that issue. But yeah, frankly speaking, so actually, the Korea and USA is different in many ways, because the size of economy and size of nation is different. But I think the reason Korea has been successful in treating the COVID-19 is we have done the necessary measure very in early stages. So and the people the Korean people are very used to the wearing masks, and that will be very helpful. So, but I'm not sure that the situation in the United States. But United States already tested so many people. So I think personally I think the peak already passed. So So I think that that's why I'm very positive that the situation here in the United States. So yeah.
So next, I have a question from Duncan with Asian Agenda. He asks, in Britain, there's been a lot of concern about the infection spreading to health workers and doctors. Has that been an issue in South Korea?
Yeah, we have some casualties from the doctors and nurses, but not that many. So yes, so we have only small number of the doctors and the nurses has impacted, and some of them passed away. Yeah.
So, to turn to some of the specific effects of the COVID-19 crisis, Bill Brown asks, how is Korea dealing with the Chinese downturns, especially in the auto industry?
Yes. So, as I mentioned earlier, the major industry are in trouble because of the COVID-19. So, and as you know, so our major industry is really connected to the Chinese China with the supply chain. So very couple of 2 months ago, so the Hyundai and Kia had a problem. The sourcing is only one part for the car, and that makes the factory in Korea stop. Yeah, but right now the supply issue is not matter anymore. But right now the auto factory in Korea is not good. Mainly because of the short of demand. So I think the problem is many came from the demand. So the supply, as of now, supply issue is not a matter anymore.
Troy, if I can comment on that as well. Korea is still very much an export-driven economy. So when the world stops consuming, and we've seen all countries hit by this, and massive unemployment. So people just aren't buying cars. They're not buying cell phones. And that impact, that ripple is felt around the world, but particularly in a country that is so export focused like South Korea.
Yes, actually same things happen in the United States. So we have the automobile factory in Alabama and Georgia. So that factory also stopped because of mainly because of the short of the demand. Yeah.
So Mark Mannion has a question for all three of us.
Mm-hmm.
He would like to know if we think the pandemic will change any of the efforts to expand the TPP-11 or now CPTPP, and will it either accelerate countries' desires to join, or will it lead them to want to leave the TPP or CPTPP now, as it is known?
Yeah. Tell me, you first. Yeah, after you. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. From my perspective, it makes an important rules-based, broad, comprehensive agreement like the Comprehensive Partnership for the Trans-Pacific Partnership, CPTPP. I think it's even more important. I think we will see countries like Taiwan, like Thailand, they will look to join agreements like CPTPP as soon as they can, because it gives you that solid supply chain. It gives your businesses confidence. I always go back to the U.S. Korea Free Trade Agreement, the KORUS FTA. During this pandemic, what I was sure of was the rules that our two countries negotiated haven't changed. So that has given comfort to the American companies. I talked to my friends at AmCham in Korea, and while yes, they're suffering, they would suffer a lot more if we didn't have these good, strong, comprehensive rules.
I think the COVID influence on the CPTPP and other trade agreement is quite neutral, because even before the coronavirus outbreak, so many companies who doing business in China try to move to other countries, mainly because of the high wages and the tougher environmental standard and so on. So that kind of the movement is the begins that kind of the trend begins with the economic mechanism. So and trade agreement itself is not related to the coronavirus that much.
Minister Zhang, I have a question for you. Given that your country has more trade agreements in force than anyone I can think of in Asia, I agree with you. The agreements have nothing to do with coronavirus, but aren't the reasons for countries to do trade agreements just as valid after we get out of the virus than they were before? Will countries still want them, those predictable rules and the high standards?
So I think that depends on the decision making, the decision making of the big countries such as the U.S. and China. So even before the COVID-19 outbreak, so many small countries like Korea concerned about the trend to the localizations and nationalism and anti-globalization. So I'm afraid that because of the COVID-19, some countries try to localize their production base to their territories. So then that makes the trade between countries goes down. So that point will affect the trade agreement as well. So because once the trade between the countries goes down, there is no need to enforce the trade agreement.
So I guess the only thing that I might add to this is, I think, Tammy, you've touched on the need for rules, the need for leadership. I think both those are important. We need rules to be able to have things function efficiently and to not have companies or countries face arbitrary decisions.
Mm-hmm.
But we also need either better enforcement mechanisms or better leadership.
Mm-hmm.
I'll be honest, I don't know the details, but there are certain provisions for requiring the continued movement of medical supplies and things during crises. And there are some national security exemptions. But I think one of the things, especially if you look at the European case, that I think has been like a real challenge and maybe disappointment on the European side, at least from what I've been able to follow, is this issue of, Germany, when it had plenty of ventilators and face masks and things, and Italy and Spain were struggling, not sending them. Now that's changed, and we're starting to see supplies flow again. But I think, this is why, I think countries, especially if you're not the United States or China, and there's interest, I think, for the United States and China to be in these types of agreements, to have rules and have certainty. But if you are, countries that aren't as large economically, why having the certainty that, either a stronger, more robust, CPTPP has, or, other trade agreements are important. But I also think we need some way, either, like I said, through leadership or better enforcement mechanisms to ensure that when these aren't normal times, that we can depend on the things we thought we could depend on. And I think that's an important piece going forward.
Yes.
Oh, please go ahead, Mr. Zhang.
Yeah, so I think the lesson the COVID-19 gave us is we need to work together. So as I mentioned earlier, so the first thing we have to do is making rule about the trading the healthcare product and govern the export control and the export ban. So that's the area of the trade negotiators. Yeah.
So I'd like to move to the next question, and my apologies if I mispronounce the last name. but Marta Okaranikova has a question. She says, thank you for providing an insight both about the current economic situation in Korea and future prospects. Against the COVID-19 background, what do you believe may be other or new directions for deepening relations in the U.S.-ROK alliance? And to what extent may we consider the COVID-19 crisis as a stimulus enhancing bilateral relations?
So Tammy, after you.
Well, I think one area where this is a stimulus enhancing situation is what we've seen, the advice come out of Korea on how to flatten the curve, but also the cooperation and collaboration. As I understand it, over 700,000 COVID testing kits. I've worked with a handful of Korean companies and the city of New York, getting materials flowing to our great New Yorkers. So I think it's shown us that when America has a need, we can count on our Korean friends to be there. And from my perspective, we just keep building on that. We have such a long, rich history of partnership and collaboration. I just think there's incredible opportunities, and there's often complementarity in our businesses. The U.S. firms we're very good in developing technology. Koreans are incredible at commercializing them and manufacturing very high quality technology at a lower price than we can do it here in the United States, frankly.
So yeah, let me answer in 2 points. So the first one is the bilateral relations between two countries. So yes, thanks to the Chorus FTA, the Tammy really contributed to the Chorus FTA. So thanks to that, so even before the corona COVID-19 outbreak, so the trade volume between two countries has been growing up. So, but I'm not sure, even after the COVID-19 outbreak, it will continue to grow. But so we have found some promising areas such as the bio industries and the financial industries and something like that. So so we can strengthen our relations between two countries. And the other thing I want to mention is the multilateral corporations. So as our the President Moon leaded the G20 and the other summit, yeah, the U.S. and Korea have to work together, making new rules so needed to prevent other the epidemics and the recovery needed to recovering the post COVID-19, including the healthcare and the economics and so on. That's my idea.
Thank you. So there are two questions which I think go together, so I want to group them together. The first is from Jonathan Lim, and he asks, has there been any industries which have grown in the face of the coronavirus, for example, cybersecurity and logistics? And then at the same time, Scott Snyder asks, in which Korean export sectors are we likely to see an early recovery of exports, given the global drop-off in demand due to COVID-19? And what do you anticipate will be the most promising early sources of demand by region or country?
Yeah, let me answer first. So I think the semiconductors and the digital digital product is the most promising one. So even during the COVID-19 outbreak, so our production and the export of our semiconductors is not decreased that much. So, and as we mentioned earlier, so we can anticipate, we can expect that much digitalized the economy after the COVID-19. So I think the demand for the semiconductor will increase, continue to increase. So, but the worst industry I can expect is the energy, the oil and gas industry. We have a quite big oil refinery industries and petrochemical industries, but many people expect that the oil prices continue to continue to low, and so that kind of the industry will be in trouble for a long time, I think.
I would add too that I think bright spots will be in the biotech industry, medical equipment and supplies, and then on the negative side, tourism, transport. They're going to be suffering for a while, I'm afraid.
Mm.
So we only have a few minutes left. So there's two other questions. One, maybe Mr. Zhang, if you could answer, and then the other, Tammy. So I have a question from John Brandon, and this one would be for you, Mr. Zhang.
Yeah.
The United States, Japan, and other countries have announced stimulus packages to tackle the economic fallout from COVID-19. What is Korea's economic stimulus package, and do you think it will be enough? And then Tammy, the question from Frank So to you would be, is there any trend that Korean companies in China are moving out of China like Japanese companies? So maybe
let me answer. So far, we have made about $16 billion of the stimulus packages, so to support our business and the people who lost their jobs. And I think that's not the end. So the ruling party has a huge majority in our Congress. So they are very active and making additional support to our workers and small and medium-sized companies. So I expect that the additional stimulus package will be possible. So besides the stimulus packages, so our central bank already cut down the interest rate, and government also prepared other types of support for the people that are left behind because of the COVID-19. So yeah.
Thank you, Tammy.
Regarding the question about Korean companies operating in China, I think small and medium-sized Korean companies, frankly, were already struggling in China with the rising wage rates and some of the additional challenges when the Chinese government would express its unhappiness about Korea hosting THAAD on their shores. So I think we're seeing some SMEs actually leaving China. But regarding the larger Korean conglomerates, the chaebols, while I think they may be adjusting their business plans there, I think the market is still so huge there, and the opportunities that I think they're going to try to find, at least the ones I'm talking to, are trying to maybe scale down, find more efficient ways to operate there.
Thank you, Tammy. And I'd like to thank you both for joining us today. This has been a really great discussion. I think we all learned a lot. But I'd also like to thank our audience who sent in a lot of really great questions. And, you know, I apologize to those of you who we weren't able to get to your questions today, but I would like to thank you all again. Thank you. This has been a great program.